The brain, not to be mistaken for Brian, is the most complex organ in our entire body. In fact, it's so complex that we barely know anything about it. And this isn't just coming from your average Joe. I mean, even our world's best neuroscientists have only just discovered a very small part of what this beautiful organ can do. This thing is truly an absolute mystery to us, even though it dictates everything that we will ever do in our lives. So, with the brain being so important, why do we learn so little about it? So, I thought of a brilliant idea. Why not combine a game that is all about destroying this wonderful organ and use it to explore our brain. Brian can go play outside. The game of choice is Sniper Elite 5, and if you've never played a Sniper Elite game, then this is probably the best way to summarize it. This game provides us with slow motion X-ray vision to show exactly how you've obliterated your fellow opponents, which makes it the perfect game for exploring the different parts of the brain. So without further ado, let's get the hell out of this submarine and start gathering some primary data. We start off our Sniper Elite journey trying to figure out the controls. Struggling a little in the process, I soon set my sights on our first target. My task was to eliminate these two guards that happened to be chilling by the brightest lights known to man. Of course, because I care about my visual system, I thought it would be necessary to follow the game's instructions and introduce these gentlemen to our sniper. And would you look at that, we have stumbled across a wild cranium. The cranium, or the skull, is the bone structure that protects the brain. The adult human skull is considered to have 22 bones that come together to make a proper solid structure. However, at birth, the skull contains 44 separate bony elements to allow for that brain to grow. This is why tiny humans have slightly squidgy heads, as the cranium is not fully developed. But with that said, I would not recommend using a small cranium as your stress ball anytime soon. The shape of the cranium differs between people, and this is perfectly normal. Yet the shape of one's cranium was once the center of a thing called phrenology. This pseudo-scientific movement gained a lot of popularity in the 19th century, and it consisted of measuring bumps on the skull and attributing them to particular mental traits. This was unfortunately used to discriminate against people and cultivated racist ideology that claimed to be based on scientific research. Thankfully, we no longer uphold phrenology and have since shut down all such claims produced by the research, if you could even call it that, surrounding phrenology. So, the cranium, a bone structure that protects the brain and was once the center of a racist, pseudo-scientific movement. Either way, it's a shame that these two gentlemen haven't insured their craniums against accidental sniper bullet damage. After completing this task, I took a little boat down to the shore and started having a little stroll. I ended up scaling up some random wall and hidden some long grass until I thought it was a good idea to continue our lessons in brain anatomy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the brain. The brain chills inside the cranium, suspended in cerebral spinal fluid, but is isolated from the bloodstream by the blood-brain barrier. The brain consists of three main parts: the cerebrum, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. The cerebrum, the largest part of the brain, consists of two cerebral hemispheres filled with around 100 billion neurons. The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, as you can see right here, is divided into 4 lobes, which we talk about throughout the video. So I encourage you to stick to the end of the video to find out about all the lobes, as they are just as important as each other. The two hemispheres communicate to each other via the corpus callosum. Unfortunately for this fellow though, their 200 million myelinated nerve fibers found in the corpus callosum have been somewhat interrupted. After this, I continue my journey through the French countryside, introducing myself to other gentlemen. And after a few more meet and greets, I snuck into this warehouse because that's what the game told me to do. Thankfully though, inside was our friend.
Charlie?
She was Scottish.
Focus, focus, there's pizza on your focus.
And she was part of a resistance group trying to withstand the same enemy as myself. Therefore, she told me some intel about the person that we needed to find, and of course I completely zoned out, skipped the ability to upgrade my weapons, and continued on my journey, leaving my Scottish friend to teleport to our next meeting point. Some brisk strolls later, I ended up coming across a little patrol base. Surrounding it was a vehicle and a few guards. On scoping out the area, the back of this car illuminated red indicated that I had the ability to explode. So, of course, I decided to shoot it. However, it didn't really blow up, and when it eventually did blow up, it hardly had the effect that I was going for. And because of this, my cover was completely blown. So, just like when you're found during a hide and seek game when you're younger, I pulled out my sniper rifle and gaslit these people into thinking that they never saw me. And would you look at that? A cheeky frontal lobe. The frontal lobe, like it says in the name, is this brain area found at the front of your brain. They are responsible for your voluntary movement, ocular movement, speech control, and expression of emotions. As the frontal lobe is at the front of the brain, it is the area that is most likely to suffer injury. In fact, there is a very interesting case study that goes into this, and it goes by the name of Phineas Gage. Small hint, it may have something to do with this rod going through this man's head, and somehow he still manages to survive. Typically, the left frontal lobe is the home to an area called Broca's area, which is responsible for our speech production. So I guess whilst recording this voiceover, my Broca's area is working overtime. Another thing about the frontal lobe is that it only fully matures after your 20s, which explains why teenagers are sometimes a bit... So, just in case you missed it, here's another shot of the frontal lobes. With these gentlemen's frontal lobes being a thing of the past, we could swiftly move on to being the most unstealthy individual in the game. Because I was only playing on the default difficulty, my opponents could not comprehend what cover was, so instead they just stood there and I guess hoped for the best. Of course, because my aim is
clapped.
I even struggled under such condescending conditions. A perfectly placed eye shot for this individual presents us with a brilliant segue to another brain area. The occipital lobe, as you can probably guess, is all to do with vision. Visual information is processed in the occipital lobe and then gets transported into the other areas of the brain so we can take action on our visual stimuli. In addition to this, whenever you are a subject to stuff like gaze skewing, after effects or illusions, it's usually to do with your occipital lobe getting a little bit confused, overworked, or manipulated. The visual system is extremely complicated, and like every brain area I'm covering today, there's only so much I can say about it in one video. Therefore, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel so we can learn more about psychology through gaming. Anyways, all this termination of brain areas has got the enemy gentleman quite riled up. So much so that trying to be quiet was completely out of the window. And here we started to run into some trouble. I'm sure you've heard of the fight or flight reaction. Well, I was definitely on the fight side of things until the inevitable happened. But it happened again and again and again. After being rather unsuccessful for a prolonged period of time, I decided to change my tactic a little. Initially, my tactic was to just shoot whoever started shooting me, but because there were so many people about, they just outgunned me. So this time I decided to leg it to the little trenches and make my way through to the objective with a bit of cover. A few stealth kills later, and I was ready to blow up this door. Obviously, because I clearly didn't pay attention in my combustion theory lectures while studying psychology, I stood too close to the explosives and blew myself up. So I gave that another go and blew myself up again. But third time's a charm, and I safely entered this little bunker. Now, I didn't really have a plan for what I was going to do here, so I found some shelter and got to work. Of course, I was well aware that a single grenade would absolutely fuck me up, but because the game was on a default difficulty, the enemy was yet to evolve such advanced thinking. Now, with everyone safely eliminated, it was time to destroy some generators and continue on our way of peaceful exploration in the French countryside. I mean, that would have been the plan until the sudden male urge to shoot an NPC in the testicles didn't suddenly kidnap my mind. I found my target, lined up the shot, and missed. Multiple times. But fear not, as the worst thing that happened was me taking part in a swift getaway. Okay, maybe something else happened as well. So I tried the mission again, but this time suppressing my intrusive thoughts and actually attempting to destroy these bunkers in a somewhat silent way. The second bunker also went very quietly, and the game rewarded us with a fresh cerebellum. The cerebellum is not part of the cerebrum like the other lobes are, but it is still a very important part of the brain. That is because the cerebellum is all about coordination, precision, and accurate timing. So in the case of Mr. Sniper Man here, his cerebellum plays a major role in him actually being a good sniper. I mean, if he wasn't coordinated, he might end up shooting the wrong person, or if his precision or accuracy were out of whack, well, we already know what happens when that is the case. But hang on a minute, play that clip one more time. Upon closer inspection, it seems like the bullet not only travels through the cerebellum, but it also pays a small visit to the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is all about making sense of our senses, and it also helps out in the processing of language. Our bodies constantly relay information through different types of receptors like pain or touch receptors, and then they pass that information onto the thalamus. The thalamus then relays that info to our parietal lobe to basically let us know that we may be suffering from a slight headache due to a lodged sniper rifle bullet. Actually, the brain has no pain receptors, so that's factually incorrect, but still, it doesn't really mean much for this fella. Connecting the cerebellum and the cerebrum to the spinal cord is the brainstem, the last major part of the brain. The brainstem is super important as it maintains the duty of relaying information to and from the brain onto other areas of our bodies. Now, at this point, my brainstem relayed the information I should continue destroying more enemy bunkers. With both bunkers destroyed quietly, of course, I continue my journey down the road, finding myself in a bit of a pickle. A pickle being multiple enemies standing in the way of this long road. So I thought to myself, what would this guy do in this situation as a seasoned vet in the field? A true pro of organized murder. And my answer to these questions was to stay ground level with the enemy behind the smallest wall imaginable and try your best. With some attempts at this, some more successful than others, we continued our little road trip until we got to the safe house we wanted to get to. The guy that was meant to meet us there bailed on us. By that I mean he was dead, but still, very poor form from this guy, but we still nicked his secret stash and dashed. After this slight mishap, we continued down the same road we were on until a little convoy stood in our way. Not realizing that most of these gentlemen were asleep, I decided to introduce them to something a bit more deep than REM sleep. Hopefully for them, they were dreaming about the wonders that is the temporal lobe, as their temporal lobes were definitely in a world of wonder. The temporal lobes are the final of the 4 lobes situated in the cerebrum. The main functions of the temporal lobes are to do with long-term memory and auditory information. The temporal lobes love to communicate with the hippocampus to create explicit long-term memory, and they also house the primary auditory cortex. So you can thank your temporal lobes for processing all that complicated auditory information whenever you hear basically anything. At this point, all this shooting got me tired out. I had enough violence for one day, so I decided to leg it to the final meeting point, which happened to be in this random farmyard barn thing. Inside we were met with a very blunt French lady.
Did you get the intel?
No.
And our Scottish mate. We all yapped about what was going on, but only until the last moment did something important come up. We finally had a good lead into the person who was behind all the stuff that we were trying to fight against. So with that information, I decided to uninstall the game and never play it again.
Take care, Charlie.
In today's video, I decided to focus on a thing called localization of function to explain the brain areas, or the brain in general. This basically means attributing certain areas of the brain to certain functions. However, like I said at the start of the video, the brain is really complex. Too complex, in fact, for us to just say, okay, this area does this, and that area does that. It's true that certain areas of the brain are more dedicated to certain tasks, but in reality, these areas communicate with each other in extremely complex ways to achieve a certain goal. This happens even if the brain area is not necessarily dedicated to doing a certain task. And because of this complicated communication network that our brains have developed through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, the brain still remains a great mystery to us Homo sapiens. The purpose of this video was to provide you guys an introduction into the brain and hopefully stimulate those dopaminergic neurons for you to continue down a path of learning more about the brain. I hope I was successful in this endeavor, and if you've learned something new, then why not like the video and even consider subscribing. If you haven't though, I encourage you to post a cool fact about the brain in the comments down below.